So in this video, we're going to be discussing the difference between linear and nonlinear. So the definitions of linear is a line that shows a rate of change. So that rate of change is known as the slope. So that rise over run. So it was a constant rate. So that means that it rose the same amount and ran the same amount. So rise over run. Whereas nonlinear is not going to be a line, and it doesn't show a constant rate of change. So it might have where it's multiplying now, or you're going up by double the amount, or some of the situations you might see where it doesn't go up by the same amount at all. So that would not make a constant rate of change, or it would not make a line. So for example, if you were looking at a table, if you notice in this one, from 3 to 6, 6 to 9, and 9 to 12, it's going up by 3. And on our x value, the change is 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, and it's going up 2. So we know that slope is always y over x. So in this case, our slope would be 3/2. And we could always write that as a linear equation because a linear line is going to be in y equals mx plus b. So in this case, we have y equals 3/2 x, because if you notice, if you went down 3 more, you'd be at 0, and if you went down 2 more, you'd be at 0. So it would be at the origin. That's where it would start. So that would be an example of a linear line or linear equation. Or this would be a nonlinear situation because it's not a constant rate. So if you see that the y values are going up by 3, up by 4, up by 1, whereas the x values are going all up by 2, but it's not a constant rate because the y values are not going up by the same amount. So if you notice that, you want to look at your table and you want to identify if it's going up by the same amount on both sides, then it's going to be a linear. If it's going up by different amounts on either or, like on the y side or the x side, then it's not a constant rate. So another situation you might see is a graph. So does the graph represent a linear or nonlinear function? Anytime you see a graph of a line, that is going to be a linear equation, or that's going to be linear. Any other situation where it's not a line, so this is an example of a parabola, that would not have a constant rate of change, so that would be nonlinear. So it's either a line or it's not a line, where it would make it linear versus nonlinear. And in this case, identify, so this last part, it says identify a function from the equation. So we have y equals x plus 2. If you ever see it in y equals mx plus b, or you can solve it for y equals mx plus b. So for example, if you saw it in standard form, either one of those ways would make it a linear equation. So in this case, you would notice that the slope is 1 and the y-intercept is a positive 2. So that would be a linear equation. So remember that it also could be in standard form, which would be like ax plus by equals c, and then you solve for y, and that still would be a linear equation. So watch out for that. But for example, in this one, we have y equals x squared plus 2. This is not in y equals mx plus b. What gives it away is that it has that exponent, which would not make it linear. So if you see any situations, so I'm going to write that down here. If you see it in standard form also, that would be considered a linear equation because you could solve for y. So remember that standard form is ax plus by equals c. So if you see it in this form and you can solve for y and get it by itself, it would be an example of a linear function. So these 3 ways, a table, a graph, or an equation, are going to be the 3 ways to identify if it's linear or nonlinear. So you've got to look at the data that is given. So it's either a table, a graph, or an equation. So remember, it's got to be a constant rate of change for it to be linear. It has to be a line on your graph, and so it could be a vertical or horizontal line because that would be linear. And in this case, it's y equals mx plus b, so that would be considered linear. If it doesn't have a constant rate of change, then it is nonlinear. If it is not a line or does not have a constant rate of change, it is nonlinear. And if it's not in y equals mx plus b, so if it has exponents or anything like that, it's going to be nonlinear.